I'd like to welcome everybody to this fundraiser today. My name is Deborah Amos, or Deb, which is easier, and I have been involved in covering Syria for a long time. This fundraiser is hosted by the Syrian Emergency Task Force. So this is a virtual fundraiser. It's to support democracy, justice, and relief in Syria. Of course, this is a motivated event because of the end of the Assad regime, which was a surprise to almost all of us, September 2024. It was a remarkable historical moment, and the best answer to Assad is forever. All of our speakers today are inspiring, informative, and are here to support the aim to build a new Syria. I want to thank the co-hosts for this event. The goal today is to reach $500,000, and almost half of that has been donated. So this is very good news. So you only have half the work you thought you had to do. Don't worry, you're going to see a slide about what you do to donate money. You don't have to join PayPal. You just have to click on that link. Now, a little bit of personal history. I've been reporting on Syria for more than 2 decades. I was in Beirut when the uprising began. Next, I moved to southern Turkey, where I met an impossibly young, energetic, and talkative guy named Muaz Mustafa. He convinced me to come with him in a trip crossing the border into Syria, where he and his team were delivering police uniforms to a town in northern Syria. I have often thought, what was I thinking? And I said that often when I worked with Muaz, but he always delivered, and he also, more important, delivered me safe and sound. Let me give you a couple of housekeeping details for this webinar. Please put your name and your location in the chat. We want to know where you are. I mean, not that we're going to do anything, but it's for us to know that we have a wide audience. And for those of you who have questions, add that to the chat as well. This event is an hour long, but those who want to stay on for a Q&A, short one, you are welcome. And now we're going to start with a short video.
لا اطفال رضع اغلب اطفال رضع يعني انا عندي 6 اولاد هذا عنده 10 اولاد هذا عنده 7 اولاد صرنا نحن هلا في عالم صار وعالم يومين.
Thanks. That was a nice little memory. I want to begin with one of the more important people on this panel, and that is the executive director of CETF, Muaz Mustafa. He's a tireless worker, tireless supporter of Syria, but the emergency in the title of this organization has a different meaning today, which is why we're here. Muaz?
Thanks, Deb. And thank you all for joining us. I wanted to check, Sully, with you. I'm happy to go, but there was a video that we wanted to play first, correct?
The causes of the revolution were not born in 2011, but are rooted in the past 5 decades.
The Syrian uprising began in 2011 when children were actually inspired by the Arab Spring happening in the neighboring countries right next to them.
Children wrote on the walls, "Jayik ad-dor ya doktor," meaning "your turn is coming, doctor," referring to Assad, who is an eye doctor, the president of Syria. Those children wrote these words of freedom on the walls of their schools, and the intelligence services arrested them, tortured them. And their parents, as a natural reaction, went out to the street saying, "Hey, we want our kids." And suddenly the intelligence services come, the military comes, and they start shooting people.
Before the war started in 2011, Syria had one of the highest literacy rates in the world. Moaz had identified, a school that was operating in northwest Syria, but it had zero support. We started the Wisdom House in 2016. We started paying the teachers' salaries and giving them materials and school supplies, printers.
Some 8,000 internally displaced Syrians living near the Jordanian border have just received much-needed humanitarian supplies. This was the first delivery of aid in more than a year. A US-based non-governmental agency called the Syrian Emergency Task Force organized the effort with support from the US military.
We've been able to bring in seeds, wheat seeds, vegetable and fruit seeds, and irrigation equipment. For once, a story of a good story out of Rukban. In over 14 years, 12 to 14 million displaced, both internally and externally, the most displaced people on Earth. 1 million people killed, hundreds of thousands tortured to death in horrible ways, hundreds of thousands thrown into mass graves, the utilization of chemical weapons, the entire Russian Air Force. Despite all of that, the Syrian people continue to demand their rights every single day. And those young children, kids, 9, 6, 12 years old, writing on the wall, it's now your turn, doctor, never forgot their friends, never forgot their families and what they went through. And many of those kids that were besieged in Aleppo and kicked out as like 6-year-olds and 7-year-olds, were now coming back as liberators to their own cities and towns. Aleppo was liberated in a matter of 2 days, and from Aleppo on to Hama, which took a little bit longer, and then to Homs, which fell pretty quickly, and then to Damascus. At the end of the day, it was liberated by those kids. The same kids that wrote on the wall, the same kids that were tortured, the same kids that grew up in refugee camps and lost their friends and lost their family members, the same kids that grew up, trained, worked together and liberated their country, and now have kind of given the country back to its people.
Those are amazing pictures and captures two things. One, where we are in history, and two, where your donations go to those very places that is necessary now. I have another introduction, and that's for Ambassador Stephen Rapp, a longtime supporter of justice for Syria, a former US ambassador at large for war crimes issues. I'm going to turn it over to you, Stephen.
Well, it's wonderful being at this event today and to be with all of you, and particularly to be associated with the Syrian Emergency Task Force. My association began in early 2014 when, with Moaz, I met Caesar, the brave military photographer, who brought out 55,000 photos evidencing the torture and murder of 11,000 men, women, and children over a period of 20 months in Damascus security facilities, and then worked with Moaz and SETF in assuring the safety and permanent status of Caesar and his family in a Western country, in delivering his photos to the FBI, who determined through their laboratory that there were no artifices, no inconsistencies, no fake news, that they represented real people and real events, and then in bringing him and his evidence to Washington and to the world. Without his irrefutable proof, there would have been no cases against the torturers who faced justice in Western courtrooms, even while the regime ran its machinery of death in Damascus. There would have been no cases that signaled to all persons and companies who would rehabilitate and assist this regime, invest in buildings constructed on property stolen from those who the regime had tortured to death, would have sent them a message that they would be complicit in those crimes. Crimes which across their range in the last more than 13 years amount to the worst atrocities of this 21st century. It's wonderful that our friend Fareed Al-Matam is now free to tell the world that he is Caesar, the man whose photographic evidence kept the hopes for justice alive for hundreds of thousands of victims of the Assad regime. It's rare that one man's courage has meant so much. Without SETF, his bravery, his evidence would have had nowhere near the impact that they've had. SETS also provided the key aid and protection to other witnesses, such as the gravedigger and the two bulldozer drivers, and found through its research corroboration from satellite imagery of the mass graves, bringing that evidence to the New York Times and to other media organizations, showing that machinery of death had continued to grind out its victims after August of 2013 when Caesar left Syria, producing perhaps 10 times as many as the numbers of dead that were evidenced by Caesar's photos. More broadly, SETF, over the course of more than a dozen years, has sounded the message that our engagement with Syria as Americans and the international community as a whole needed to put Syrians first, to prioritize their needs through humanitarian assistance, including in the Northwest after the dreadful earthquake in February of 2023, and in Rukban and in southeast Syria, where more than 10,000 suffered from hunger and thirst, and almost the total siege, to assure Syrians that they had not been forgotten, and to prevent the author of their suffering from being rehabilitated, from being welcomed back with his crimes forgotten, even as he continued to commit them. Beyond a shadow of doubt, without CTF, there would have been no tough Caesar sanctions passed unanimously through Congress, and instead aid and trade would have flowed to Assad, enabling him to stay in power and to continue his crimes against the Syrian people. But because of those efforts, he was weakened, and it was possible for him to be overthrown by the Syrian people themselves. It has been one of the greatest experiences of my life to have visited Syria now twice since the overthrow of Assad. Trips in December for 7 days, 7 days after the fall of Assad, and again last week, joining the inspiring return of a group of Syrian American Jews. The chance to visit Unit 215, the detention facility where the majority of Caesar's victims, the pictures, the photos that he depicted, those individuals in those photos were tortured to death in that Unit 215, where our friend Omar al-Shogri suffered and was forced to mark the number of inmates in the facility on the bodies of those fellow prisoners, including the body of his cousin, numbers which then later showed in the Caesar photos. To go to El Meza, the headquarters of Air Force Intelligence, the site of one of the most dreadful facilities of torture and murder, where Mazen Hamada was subjected to horrendous torture and utilization, where he was even beaten in the nearby hospital, the very hospital in the loading docks of which Caesar was ordered to photograph the corpses of Mazen's fellow prisoners. And to Sednaya, a veritable city of death, to the execution room full of bloody nooses where the Syrian American Lila Shrakhani was hanged, and whose case is now subject to a federal indictment in Chicago, thanks also to SETF, and to the Sednaya cells where Mazen was killed, Mazen Hamada, hours before the fall of the regime. And then to the mass graves at Naja and Katefa, where it was possible to corroborate what we knew from the satellites and from our witnesses, where tens of thousands are interred in anonymous graves. And on this last trip to go north, 2 hours north of Damascus, to Baba Amr in Homs, where the regime began the practice of exterminating those in areas that have resisted its tyranny, to visit a cold storage building where survivors have been packed in and dynamited, and to see there the sandals and bones of children. There is so much work still to do. And the work of SETF is more important than ever. Not to lose this moment, not to allow Syria to drift back to dictatorship or worse, to conflict. To campaign to relieve Syria of the sanctions passed because of the regime, a regime which is now gone. And so those sanctions should be gone as well. And to help Syria rebuild, to fulfill the dreams of the Syrian people, to allow those who want to go back to return, and to be an example to all the world of a transition where the whole truth is told, where families learn what happened to their loved ones, where they can rebury the dead with dignity and hold the major perpetrators to account so that it does not happen again in Syria or anywhere in the world. Your donations are more important than ever before. So much more important even now because government aid is frozen to many of our partners' organizations and they're weakening. Those donations will have an amazing impact because of all the organizations that I've worked with in my life, and I'm on the board of I think 12 of them now, there is nowhere where your dollars go as far. So please, please give generously. Back to you, Deb.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Rapp. I'm going to give one more turn to Moaz to speak a few words before we move on to Miriam Kamelmaz.
Thank you, Deb, and thank you, Ambassador Rapp. And once again, welcome to you all. Syria today is the closest country in the whole world, out of all the Arab countries in the whole world, to becoming the first Arab democracy. That's not a dream anymore. It's a reality that we're on the path towards. And in order to do so, it's really, really important that certain sort of landmark issues are addressed. One are the sanctions and designations, which I'll talk about. Two is the enshrining of a new constitution that is inclusive of everyone's individual rights, regardless of ethnicity or religion, or geography or gender. And three, ensuring too that there is a transitional justice process that not just ensures accountability, but helps heal the wounds that have been caused by the Assad regime. And I'll start first by talking about SETF's key role in the lifting of sanctions. Now, the Syrian Emergency Task Force, by being custodians for a long time of the Caesar file, working on bills like the Captagon 1 and 2, other things, have played an important role in weakening the Assad regime's institutions, particularly those that are part of the intelligence apparatus and Ministry of Defense. Assad that was mobilizing the government institutions, which he owned as a mafia controlling the country for a horrible machinery of death that went on for way too long. But now, as Ambassador said, and as Deborah mentioned, as the Syrian people have liberated themselves, sanctions on institutions are no longer necessary. As a matter of fact, no sanctions or designations should remain in Syria for many reasons, and we know exactly why. But we also know their exact breakdown and how complicated these things can be. Not impossible to do, but we have to, just to give you an idea, there are 9 executive orders that include sanctions on Syria. There is designations, there are also sanctions like the Caesar Act, for example, that came from Congress. There are designations and sanctions that go back all the way to 1979. So think of sanctions like the Caesar Act, as well as other acts like the Syria Accountability Act back 2003 in the executive orders, with overlays of a state sponsor of terror designation for the state, an FTO, foreign terrorist organization designation as well for again the new state, as well as individual designations. It is complicated, but it's not impossible. And the harder that we work and the more capacity that we have to do this, we can be able to hopefully lift these sanctions and designations in a matter of months as opposed to a matter of years. And I believe sincerely that SETF is the tip of the spear on this. We know in detail what these designations and sanctions are and who to talk to make sure that they go away. And I'll give you a little bit of an idea of what we've done so far. Right now, we've brought over 40 members of the House and Senate to Syria. Today, we are connecting members of Congress directly to people on the ground in Syria, Orthodox priests, the Catholic Bishop of Syria, the Jewish community in Syria, all the different minorities in Syria, to make sure that people in the halls of power here know that this new Syria is not one where minorities are hurt. It is not one where women are forced to cover their hair. It is one where people are finally regaining their country back. We have also been key in ensuring the very first meeting between the new Syrian government and the US military on the ground. We did that only days after liberation. As well as coordinating Assistant Secretary Barbara Leaf's visit and meeting with the new, now transitional president of Syria and the foreign minister. We're also ensuring that the that what's happening in Syria is broadcast to the world in real time, because there's been a lot of misinformation at the beginning. And if people go back in the dates, you would see that a lot of people were saying, oh, it's what's happening in Syria is, extremists taking over, etc. But we ensured that we corrected that narrative by being on every major channel in the US as the liberation happened, but also bringing in dozens of major outlets to the ground, letting them freely talk to everyone and go anywhere in order to show the world what was really going on. On the sanctions lifting, we are coordinating directly. Just in a few days, I'll be back at the White House and meetings at the US Treasury and the State Department, specifically concerning sanctions. We are continuing to coordinate key delegations that go back to Syria in order to see what's happening. And we are coordinating between the US military and the new Damascus government for the true enduring defeat of what is remaining of ISIS in the formerly regime-held areas of the Syrian desert. In terms of building, so as we go forward, both taking off the designations and the sanctions goes hand in hand with showing the world and ensuring that the new Damascus government is working with all of the Syrian people in that regard. So just a few days ago, as Ambassador Raab mentioned, we were able to bring back the Syrian Jewish community, and it was the most wonderful thing to see. People that had been exiled for 34 years from going to their country, going back to their neighborhoods and seeing neighbors and old friends come up to hug them and say, welcome back. It was also bittersweet to be able to go to places like the Jobar Synagogue, the oldest synagogue in the world, that unfortunately has been destroyed by the Assad regime, alongside with the whole neighborhood. But today, the Syrian Jewish community, as with all other communities in Syria, have become a very key and important voice in calling on the lifting of sanctions and designations. And finally, another important part in the building of this new democracy is ensuring that we bring to Damascus the expertise of individuals like Ambassador Raab to help guide and advise on how do we preserve evidence, how do we ensure that these mass graves, for example, that we have too many of with hundreds of thousands of bodies, are protected, and then that the right experts are able to come in and, using DNA analysis, give people their closure about what happened to their loved ones, including my own family members. Just on this trip, just 2 days ago, we discovered 11 mass grave sites on a mountain overlooking the city. That was after we were able to identify the person who drove the bodies from the intelligence branches to the mass graves. Yet another key witness that SETF, alongside the gravediggers and Caesar and others, have been able to protect and bring their voice to the world, so that the world remembers this never again moment, the worst crimes of the 21st century that have occurred in Syria, but to also ensure that we move forward where we identify these bodies, and then where we're able to help the accountability for what's happening in a way where there is transitional justice, in a way where people can then move on with their lives, and that no horrible revenge attacks happen against any community from what's going on. I'll talk a little bit more to you later about our humanitarian work as well, but for now, I'll pass it back to Deborah.
I have one question, unscripted, but I wanted to know about the EU sanction lifting. I believe it's to happen tomorrow. Does it help? Is it enough? Is it a model? Does it convince the Americans?
Look, it all helps. It helps in the sense that the United States sees that the world's trending toward the lifting of sanctions. It helps in the sense that there can be flights now directly to Europe from Damascus. These are all very good things. But international financial systems are American financial systems. And without them, nothing can go on. That's why it's so key in this sort of ever-shrinking window of time that we do all we can to remove sanctions quickly. And the reason it's an ever-shrinking window is because we don't want to see, God forbid, a failed state, if we do not lift sanctions in a matter of months. And because now is the time to convince the president and Congress to lift sanctions before, things take too long and Syria is no longer a priority. And that's why it's so important to support SETF's efforts, because nothing replaces the lifting of American sanctions and designations.
Thank you. I'm going to now turn to Miriam Kamelmaz. We spoke together for the first time in 2019. That was when your family decided to take the story public of your father, Maj Campbell Maz. He disappeared in Syria, February 2017. He had traveled there to make a condolence call after his father died, your grandfather, and then he was not seen again. So I wonder if you will kindly pick up the story.
Thank you, Deborah. Correct. First of all, I'd like to thank you for having me and for that introduction. And I'd like to say Syrian Emergency Task Force has held our hand and guided us throughout the most difficult time of our lives. My father's story starts on February 14th, 2017, when he drove safely into Damascus after checking his name, making sure that he was safe to enter. And he phoned my mom, called her to let her know that he had arrived safely, all was well, and he was going to call her back soon. The very next day, within less than 24 hours of his arrival, he was stopped at a temporary checkpoint and kidnapped, where he disappeared. And we knew nothing about him at all. My father is an award-winning humanitarian, a psychotherapist, and he's a trauma expert. And he had worked all over the world treating those that had suffered the most extreme forms of trauma. And his specialty was to work with those that had been through war. So he had set up two different branches, institutes in Lebanon, the International Institute for Psychosocial Development, where he treated many refugees for their trauma coming out from Syria. Unfortunately, within less than 24 hours of his arrival, once he had disappeared and we had no information about him, first thing we did was to turn to the US government to help us and to find any form of contacts within Syria to help locate him. For 2 years, we were very quietly working to find any sort of information about him. We kept reaching wall after wall with no luck. He had completely disappeared. We had no information about where they had taken him into the system, where he was, or anything that had happened to him. After 2 years of being completely quiet, we realized that we were coming to a dead end. We needed to step it up, and the US government was not doing enough. That's when the Syrian Emergency Task Force came in and introduced themselves, Muaz Mustafa, and there was a lot of fear of going public, of course, as in the family of Leila Shweikani had just been notified of their daughter's execution, yet the family refused to go public. Many families refused to go public because of the fear of retaliation from the Syrian government. Everybody knows once you speak out negatively about the Syrian government, then that would mean you would be on the list of the wanted. You can no longer travel to Syria. You can no longer go visit family. So it was a very big decision for our family to make, yet it was a very necessary and important one. First, my father represented hundreds of thousands. He wasn't a unique case in Syria. He wasn't different from all the other Syrians that had disappeared, all the innocent people that had just completely lost track of where they were. Nobody knew anything about them. My father wasn't unique in that sense, but he was an American citizen. The US government did have to play a role in finding him. And Syrian Emergency Task Force stepped in 2018, and in early January of 2019, we went public with the help of Syrian Emergency Task Force. We were able to get on all the major news outlets, from Wall Street Journal to New York Times, Washington Post, CNN, NPR, Fox, CBS, Al Jazeera, Al Arabiya, and so many more. After that, we were then set up to go to Congress. We met with many congressional members, senators. We were introduced to the Foley Foundation, a wonderful foundation that has supported us tremendously. After that, we also met with plenty hostage negotiators. We were finally heard by the US government, who picked up our case and took it more serious. The Hostage Recovery Fusion Cell, as well as a Special Presidential Envoy for Hostage Affairs, finally picked up the case, and President Trump then ordered for Kash Patel and the Special Presidential Envoy for Hostage Affairs, Roger Carstens, to travel to Damascus and meet with Damascus officials. It was a big deal at that time because US officials had not gone to Syria within the past 10 years. It was the first trip for them into Syria, into Damascus, and to meet with Syrian officials. While they were there, they asked about my father and the other Americans that were detained. The Syrian government continued to be absolutely secretive, not a word about my father's fate or any of the other Americans. Instead, they wanted to negotiate, and they had high expectations for their negotiations. Considering that we didn't know if my father was alive or not at this time, it was very tragic to see that they refused to tell us what happened to my father, yet they wanted to continue negotiating without telling us if he's alive or not. In 2020, that's when President Trump sent Kash Patel and Roger Carstens. And then in May, we continued to know nothing about my father. It was years of unknown, working relentlessly. We joined Bring Our Families Home campaign, continued to pursue every route that we can to find information about him. We were unsuccessful in all ways possible. He was completely gone. In May of 2024, finally, the US government sent 8 US officials from different departments in the US government who confirmed to us that they had highly credible information that my father had passed in the Syrian regime's custody. How or what or when was all questionable. None of that was provided. The only thing that they knew was that he was no longer alive. But we don't know what happened to him or when it happened to him or who ordered for him to be killed. That was all still a big mystery. But on June 11th, 2024, the hostage and wrongful detainee flag flew for my father above the White House and the Capitol and the State Department. This flag flies for those that had died as a hostage or wrongful detainee over in abroad, or if they had come home successfully. And when that flag flew from my father above the White House, the Capitol, and the State Department, it not only represented my father, it represented the hundreds and thousands that had disappeared within the Syrian government's hands. My father, again, he wasn't unique. And for the flag to fly above the White House, recognizing a Syrian American who was killed under the Syrian regime's custody, shows that the US government had truly believed that, every human being that had disappeared in the Syrian government was an innocent soul that had been unjustly taken. After that, we decided that we needed to file a civil lawsuit. And with the help of the Syrian Emergency Task Force, we wanted to hold those accountable and to hold the Syrian regime accountable for my father's death. And with the help of the Syrian Emergency Task Force, they helped us find the top lawyers in Washington, D.C. to be able to file our lawsuit. And in July, we finally filed that lawsuit to sue the Syrian government at that time for my father's unjust death. Unfortunately, we still don't have full closure. We still don't have a body. We don't have a file. We don't know anything of what happened to him. And for that, I rely on the Syrian Emergency Task Force to continue doing what they do best in helping our families. I trust that they are the right organization that will continue to find our family members, to find DNA, to find the files, to hold a criminal case, continue helping us to continue doing a criminal case against the Syrian government. We must hold them accountable for the hundreds and thousands of innocent souls that have been taken, for the men, women, and children, for the elderly, and for those not just that were Syrian for taken, for the many different people of different nationalities that were taken by the Syrian government. I trust the Syrian Emergency Task Force, and I ask that everyone continues to support them to do what they do best, to continue helping people like my family and all the other Syrians that have lost their lives in this horrific situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Miriam. Thank you a lot. Was one more word from you.
Thank you. Just heartening to hear Miriam, who's become and has been the tip of the spear for her family in her search for her dad. And working with SETF, we were able to establish the wrongful detainee task force in Congress, which has a Republican and a Democrat co-chairman that continues to help. And so what Miriam has done for her family continues to serve so many other families. And now I want to move on to the last part of our work. Earlier, I mentioned our, policy advocacy work, and now it's focused, and this is our main priority, to lift sanctions and designations. Number two is our accountability work, both chasing war criminals. We got a brigadier general arrested in Los Angeles. You will see his trial start in August, and we helped from identifying mass graves, supporting the gravediggers and Caesar, and supporting these prosecutions, but and also our work to show the world what's happening in Syria. 12 stories with 60 Minutes helped in production by SETF and many outlets, including all of the major ones in the United States, to show the truth about Syria and what's happening there, both during the war and today on our road to democracy. But the most heartwarming part of the work is the humanitarian work that SETF also did not forget. And I want to talk to you a little bit about Rukban Camp. It is a camp where for 9 years people lived in the middle of a desert, completely besieged by Iran, Russia, ISIS, and the Assad regime, with closed borders both to Iraq and to Jordan. Thousands of families in the middle of a desert. And the reason that they remained there is they were afforded protection from aerial attacks by the presence of the United States military at a small military garrison called the 10th Garrison, and nearby another U.S. military base in the very north of Jordan called Tower 22. SETF was the only organization that never forgot this camp. No United Nations, no NGOs whatsoever. Nothing could go into this camp unless it was smuggled in at great cost of both life and treasure of these people to sneak it in from Rukban, from Damascus in the interior of Syria that was under the control of the Russians and the Iranians and the criminal Assad regime. But SETF never gave up, not only putting a pharmacy where we smuggled in medicine and gave it away for free, but then making a deal. I mean, imagine the small NGO made a deal with the US military outside of any contract or anything, just meeting the right people and expressing the need. And the US military, I'm very proud to say, allowed us the utilization of their bases and of their military planes like Chinooks and helicopters and Black Hawks and big fixed-wing planes like C-130s and C-17s to provide food and to provide books in established schools, to provide medicine, to bring in doctors. Imagine 9 years you don't have a doctor, or imagine your daughters growing up from first grade to 8th grade and never being able to go to school. It was SETF that brought and established schools across the camp, that started farms and agriculture in the middle of the desert, that was able to bring doctors regularly on these military flights, and that helped give a lifeline to these people. It costs us dearly as an organization. Again, we're a very small nonprofit 501c3. It's tax deductible, so guys, please donate. You can write it off on your taxes. But it was difficult. How do you govern a 55-kilometer area? It's a pretty big place. And how do you keep it going while having all these other priorities that we have? But if we didn't, those people would have died. And it was so heartening after the liberation of Syria and the breaking truly of the siege. People came and said, thank you. Thank you for keeping us alive until we were free. And today, Rukban is in its very last chapter of this inspirational story. There are the poorest of the poor of the camp that still cannot afford the transportation to get back to their homes. They still sit in the desert. Thank God, we're able to provide some aid. The books are still there, the farms are still there, but they need to go home. And SETF is committed to bringing back about 400 families or so, about 2,000 people back to their homes in the coming month. And that's something we need your support to do. SETF has also, for the past 8 or 9 years almost, have had a women's center, which was a high school for women and a vocational center to treat women. This women's center sits amongst 1,270 internally displaced persons camps. Millions of people, young ladies that because of the war could not finish high school, could not take a specific college course, could not have, the training to become a nurse or open a salon and so on. Well, SETF opened the Women's Center, and as well as the Wisdom House School, a school for orphans and displaced children. Initially, those schools were in a place called Ghadfa near Marat al-Nu'man. In 2020, it was bombarded so heavily and so terribly, 800 barrel bombs in one day. Imagine that. Thanks to SETF, we were able to get buses, including the school bus, and move out not just the Women's Center, the high school, and the school for displaced of children and for orphans, but everybody else in that village, saving their lives and reestablishing the Wisdom House in northern Aleppo countryside, where when we brought 3 members of Congress about a year ago, that was their one meeting, those orphans, and I could tell you that was the most powerful meeting. All those members became supportive and now call for an end of sanctions. And we moved the Women's Center up to Atme in Idlib province. Today, we must sustain these programs because their entire town is completely destroyed. And as they slowly rebuild and come back and becomes part of the institutions and educational institutions of the state, we cannot leave them behind because they never left Syria. They carried on the whole time. And one of the reasons that they carried on and so many people carried on was that even if governments didn't care, people cared. Americans, even if they weren't of Syrian background, cared. People from across the world cared. And we were able to show the Syrian people that through something called the Letters of Hope program, which continues till today. And I invite all of you to take part in it. It's free and easy. You just write a letter. If you're a little kid, you can just draw a picture. You can say a prayer. You can send a thought. You can just say, I love you. And these letters of hope have had such an amazing sort of influence on people. I never thought, like I thought people would throw the letters back in our face and say, look, we need protection from bombs or we need food. But knowing that people cared, that people saw their struggle for democracy and dignity and freedom and stood with them, and it was really powerful. And we're going to show you a short clip. It shows you the power of these bulletproof letters. The original Wisdom House was in a town that was completely destroyed and completely occupied, but it was liberated recently, and we came back to see it. And those letters of hope, despite the best efforts of the Assad regime, were still stand on these walls. You could still see these letters from Americans standing there, outlasting the war in this hidden school that was underground. And with that, I'd like to maybe cue the Letters of Hope video.
هذه دار الحكمة للأسف.
الله يعافيكم.
هذه روضة دار الحكمة. هذه رسائل الأمل التي على الجدران لا زالت شاهد على مغول العصر. انظروا، هذه رسالة الأمل، دار الحكمة. هنا مكتوب: أسود الفيلق الخامس، إن عدتم عدنا.
That is just truly inspirational. We're even identifying whose letters those were and getting back to our friends and telling them, look, your letter withstood the war. And on the side of the wall, the Assad regime said, we're back, we're here. They wrote letters or messages, essentially, answering the letters of hope, tried to rip and burn some, but they withstood everything. But it shows the criminality of this regime. This was a kindergarten, and that's how much they hated it. Well, I want to introduce you to our next speakers. And the best way to do it, I thought about reading their very impressive and amazing bios, but I'll just tell you a story. One day, a lady walked to the Holocaust Museum. And after seeing the exhibit of the Holocaust, where millions of Jews were slaughtered by the Nazis, as she walked out, she noticed that there was, in Arabic and English, the writing, please do not forget us. Well, that was the SETF exhibit that we had installed in the Holocaust Museum back in 2014 as we became public partners of the Holocaust Museum until today. Everybody goes and sees it. Sometimes people maybe donate. Sometimes maybe they, share a story. But our next speaker did not leave at all. She stayed there and she said, I'm not going anywhere. This is happening today, and you have to tell me how I can help. So the Holocaust Museum gave her our card and mentioned an organization that had a hidden school. It was this hidden wisdom house that survived because it was hidden in the basement. You could see the whole building was destroyed. And she reached out to us and reached out to me and told me that her name was Dr. Bhavna Shyamalan and that she had this thing called the M. Night Shyamalan Foundation, which I've realized has been the greatest blessing, not just to us, but to so many leaders across the world that are making a difference in the world. And she happened to be the wife as well of M. Night Shyamalan, who I have to say was like my favorite director before I ever thought I would ever get a chance to even say hi, much less become friends and family. M. Night Shyamalan and Dr. Bhavna Shyamalan run the M. Night Shyamalan Foundation. As a lot of you, as most of you know, also has made some of the coolest movies I've ever seen. And I'm so grateful. And it remains surreal all these years later from 2016 that they stand by us. And today, they're not helping us end the atrocities and end the tyrannical regime. They're helping us build the first ever Arab democracy. So I'd like to introduce Dr. Bhavna Shyamalan and M. Night Shyamalan.
Thank you, Moaz. You made me cry. We love Moaz. I hope you can already start to tell the type of human being he is. And our foundation is very much focused around leaders because we really believe it's human beings that change the world. And it's the human being that is tenacious and resilient and really has a purest heart that is going to fight whatever obstacle is put in their way to make the changes that they want to see happen in the world. And Moaz does nothing but every time, like, you think that something can't be done, and he finds a way to do it. And over the 7 years that we've supported Moaz, the unbelievable things have happened. Like, just nothing we thought was possible would happen. He's, brought, justice for families that, and this the whole movement against Assad, we only know about it because of Moaz. And we only understand what happened in Syria because of Moaz. And it really changed our perspective and our view of what was happening there, but also what's possible. He's shown us what's possible when you keep moving, and you can move degree by degree by degree, and then in time make huge change. And so we love Moaz, and we also, as a foundation, also provide unrestricted grants. And I just want to say for a moment how important that is. When we get into sometimes giving, we feel like we need to control that money, and we need to say where it should go and how it should be used. And very early on, we decided that when we find a leader and we've vetted them and we believe, we trust them and who they are, because they've already shown us that they can move the needle and they're doing amazing work, we need to truly believe in them. And we need to just allow them to have the agency, because they know the knowledge. They're intimately tied to their work. They understand the culture. They understand the obstacles. They understand the web of connections of, you just heard Moaz speak about all the different layers of everything, and it can make your head hurt sometimes, with the intricacies of things, but he knows, and he's able to make the change because he navigates all of that. And so we just give unrestricted grants, and this is what happens. So I just kind of wanted to say a little bit about that, and then want my husband to speak here.
Gosh, so emotional just hearing all of this. And we have a foundation that supports leaders around the world, and we look for individuals that have that kind of magic sauce that Bhavna was talking about. And Moaz is our shining star of this thesis, this idea that when a human being is dedicated in a way that's absolutely pure, every single cell of them is coming from the right place, they can do extraordinary things that we don't think is possible. To be frank, when we first started, when Bhavna went to the museum and came, I was essentially America. And I was saying, forget it. Listen, we're not going to get involved in Syria. That's too complicated. There's all of this stuff. Oh, I'm getting a headache even thinking about it. And Moaz came and clarified everything. One of the great things about SETF and Moaz is they bring clarity, narrative clarity. I know I'm kind of talking about things that are in my head, the way I tell stories, but we all as human beings take in information in narrative form. And Moaz's expertise in geopolitical matters and history and spirituality, obviously in Syria, he is able to, with incredible precision, give you a clarity of the situation, which unwound all of my prejudices when I first met him, and explained to me what was happening, and that incredible lie that was being told to everyone of the civil war that was going on. Oh, these violent factions of Muslims killing each other. Oh, let's stay away from that, which is what Assad wanted. It was so beautifully unraveled by Moaz in his expertise. And he plays, and SETF plays such a critical role, both within Syria, to have been a symbolic and a literal movement of hope and the future, and that someone cares about you. And they were that for the people in Syria. And then for all the rest of us, they were this clarity, this voice that was saying, this is actually what's happening here. And we were lucky enough to meet Caesar here in our house. He was right here in this room, and the gravedigger. They all came here during the battle, during the fight, to tell us about what was happening, and for us to just say, we see you, and keep going. And that was all SETF doing that, kind of binding us to the Syrian people and their fight. And then they were getting replenished by us just seeing them, just knowing that they're there and we care about you. I can't say enough what they have done up to this point, and their impact in freeing this country. But I want to say that this moment forward, their involvement is extraordinarily important, because what we have in front of us is, in our lifetimes, maybe the most extraordinary moment that a country could have in their impact, which is they're going to be the possibility of the first democratic Muslim country. Is I can't, it sounds like I'm speaking in hyperbole, but it's more than their opportunity. Moaz and I have been talking about this. This is a chance to course correct everyone, the entire world. And SETF and Moaz will be dead center in this, and they will be on the ground. They trust Moaz, they trust SETF, as they should. They've proven themselves to have a pure heart and to know how to navigate very complicated situations. So they look to SETF. This is an incredible moment. If they do pull this off, which I believe they will, it will change everything. It will change what's possible in the world. All our expectations will change. They will teach us, because they get to do democracy 2.0. And so it's an unbelievable opportunity. SETF is at the center of changing the world. And I think Ambassador Rapp said your money couldn't go any farther. This is it. In terms of philanthropic return, this is astronomical. So thank you guys all for anything you can do for SETF.
One quick point is that when Moaz said SETF is small, it is small. It is small. So don't think this is a big organization that has massive amounts of funds, but they do so much with so little. So please do support this movement. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. We are coming to a close. I'm going to ask, because we've gotten so many questions in the chat about, I don't get this, where we put this money. Can you explain that you will not be joining PayPal? It's just a piece of bureaucracy. Thank you for putting that back on. And can you explain that it's really simple? It really is. Just look at this for a little while. We'll keep it up for a while. And I'll repeat again that you just have to click on PayPal. That's all.
Absolutely. And guys, yeah, so PayPal is the way to do it. It tells you, you have the option to create an account, but you don't have to mess with any of that. If you look towards the bottom, it says debit or credit card. You just click on that and you go forward from there. Of course, you could also just send a check to 1455 Pennsylvania Avenue Northwest, Suite 476, which you could see on the screen. But checks some people prefer. That's fine and wonderful. But I know the easiest thing and the quickest thing is to do it by clicking PayPal. And again, ignore the rest of the stuff. Just look towards the bottom. You see debit or check card and click that. And so you don't necessarily, again, have to join PayPal. You just have to click on it and just look towards the bottom, click on that and donate. And I promise you, as Knight and Bhavna said, as everyone has expressed, we're small, but I promise you, like the $1 that goes towards SETF goes so far. And the impact that we have is truly life-changing for individuals, but also for the world. And as Knight says, I believe not just Syria becoming a democracy, but showing the world that Arab and Muslim countries can be just as and even better democracies than what we have here, learning from experiences of other countries. I mean, what an amazing accomplishment to get rid of one of the worst genocidal narco-trafficking dictator and his allies, Russia and Iran, at once. And now what a pleasure it would be, what an amazing story it would be to create a democracy in the Middle East that inspires all of these nations. Sorry to go on, but if any questions on donations, please ask. Back to you, Deb.
That is your job to go on. I want to thank everybody who showed up for this virtual seminar today. I certainly want to thank all of our speakers. You all have been just terrific. Please, everybody, stay in touch. There'll be a follow-up email with information on how you donate, just in case was not effective right there, but I think he was. It's the PayPal question that people seem to have. You want to stick around for a Q&A if you haven't had enough. We will be delighted to talk to you for about 20 minutes. Put questions in the chat. We're starting to get some. We've got 2 minutes left. I'm going to let you, Moaz, have the last word, and then I will go to the Q&A.
Sure. First of all, I'm reading as they come up some of these comments. I can't thank you enough, but it's not just me. It's my greatest honor ever is to be a part of SETF. This group of individuals, most of them, the vast majority of them, not even from Syria or the Middle East or have anything to do with, the Middle East, but their humanitarianism drives them. And that's what makes us such an effective team. And by donating and by coordinating with us, you can become part of this family. I mean, the vast majority of those who work with us are volunteers because we can't afford to pay. And you can really just don't think like this isn't like donating to like the Red Cross or some other huge NGO where some goes to, this huge overhead and bureaucracy and so on. This is a place where you will see where your money goes. I'll give you an example. We were struggling to figure out how to get our staff and everything to Syria to be able to bring back the Jewish community back to Syria. I mean, it's surreal to say it out loud, but we were able to do it. And if someone had donated, a few $1,000s to be able to, buy our hotels and plane tickets to do so, and so we wouldn't have it on our credit card and figure out how to pay later. They saw the next week the news on the New York Times, Washington Post, PBS, CNN, I can go on and on, AP, Reuters, everywhere. This is the sort of work that we don't just do once in a while, we do all the time. It really is truly inspiring. That's why I'm just so honored to be part of this team and to have this family that you've heard some of them speak today on this group. So really just encourage you to donate, and not just donate, keep communicating with us. Ask us anything. We're an open book and see, where your dollars go. Truly, for me, the most inspirational organization that I've ever been a part of. And we've been successful against all odds, thank God. And now we're working on the hopeful part, right? This is still the hard part, but this is the hopeful part. Nobody's getting bombed again, Yeah, we lost family members and friends, including employees like Mazen al-Hamada, who worked with us for many years, and others that were killed by ISIS and Assad, but their blood was not in vain. And that's why we can't stop now. We cannot stop until sanctions are lifted yesterday. And nobody can do it better than us. No one has the better chance of lifting the sanctions quicker than us. This isn't being immodest, this is reality. And we are the ones that are making sure the world is talking to, in the media is coming to Syria, so that the world knows what's happening, so that people can start celebrating instead of fearing what's unfolded in Syria over the last few months. And finally, on these mass graves, we just identified one days ago. I remember walking through it with Natalie Larison and other members from our team with this new witness that drove these trucks full of bodies. For 3 years, 400 bodies a week were buried in that mass grave. Why is this important? It's important because whatever that calculation is, whatever that number is the amount of families missing their mothers and fathers and uncles and kids and grandparents, and because of our work, because that we can give comfort to people that were terrified to speak out like these key witnesses and take them by the hand to the locations, every one of these hundreds of thousands of people, God willing, through the work of SETF, with SETF's board member, Ambassador Rep leading the way, will identify their loved ones. That alone is such a great blessing. And today, the oldest synagogue in the world, thanks to the brave Jewish community that went back, can be potentially rebuilt. And by rebuilding the synagogue, you know what else it means? It means all of Jobar, a town of 400,000 people, can be rebuilt. Help us make Syria what it deserves to be, better than anything that it ever was before under Assad, a true democracy for all of its people. And we'll go into questions and answers. So I'll turn it back to you, Deb.
Oh, thanks. Let me collect myself here. So one of the first questions is, can people volunteer? Where do they do that if they want to do more than just donate?
Yeah, absolutely. And so we have these amazing WhatsApp groups. That's how we function. We mostly communicate. And one of them is a WhatsApp group for SETF's volunteers overall. And over time, as someone picks a very specific route, like someone loves media and loves film editing, someone's great at translating, someone wants to just write letters of hope all day long, or wants to go out and fundraise for us. We want you to do what you're good at, because when you do what you're good at, you love what you do, and you're actually not do what you're good at, do what you love, because then you're good at it. And that's kind of the how we move forward. So regardless of your focus, email the contact at info@SETF, go to our website, setf.ngo. We get all these emails, and reach out to any of our team members on social media or on our numbers. We can provide one also, here for WhatsApp, and we can link you in and have you work with us. But go to setf.ngo and email us, reach out to us. We need all the help we can get, especially today.
So we have a question, and I can't see who sent it in, I'm sorry. Is there any update on Austin Tice?
Yes, there is, unfortunately. So first of all, SETF I was on the ground alongside team members days after liberation, and coordinating both. I called Deborah Tice, of course I talked to the US government, etc. We had all of these geolocations from the US government of potential places where Austin and other Americans like Mesht Kamalmaz might have been. And we had been working both with Mesh's family, Austin's family in the past, and we knew about other American families that names are not public. And so we had been working on these files for a very long time. We went place by place, intelligence branch by intelligence branch, looking for documents, looking for Austin himself. Unfortunately, we found nothing, but I can tell you, without going into too much detail, it is both the assessment of SETF and the assessment of the Federal Bureau of Investigation that Austin Tice is no longer with us, that he has passed. We would love to find proof of his death, find his body and bring it home. I think that is a very difficult task, if possible, depending on what the regime did with the remnants, but Austin was killed. At the same time, we did find another young man who we kind of helped save his life. I mean, he was walking barefoot in, post-Assad areas and walking south where he could have run across any sort of bad group, including some of the former Assad regime as they retreated, or Hezbollah. His name was Pete Timmerman, went by Travis. We were able to not just, find him, secured him, talked to his mom, and brought him back to the United States, where he was flown out with the US military and brought back. Mesht Kamalmaz, my uncle, Mazen, others, some we found, some we haven't, but that's why this work is really important. Even if these people are gone, their families live on the 0.1% chance that they're alive until they know for a fact that they're gone. And that's why it's really, really important to support our work in identifying these mass graves and in ensuring that the Damascus government, working with Ambassador Rapp, is moving forward in securing and then using DNA analysis to identify who they are. And maybe we find Austin as well. And we've been working both with the Ukrainians and other experts, ICMP, the International Commission for Missing Persons, the International Impartial Investigative Mechanism, these mechanisms of the United Nations, to make sure that that work moves forward.
Okay, we have a question from Ed Norton. Is any humanitarian aid, food, medical aid, reconstruction aid coming to Syria from any of the other Muslim countries like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Indonesia, and Morocco?
That's a great question, and also a huge fan of Ed Norton. But I wanted to say that we have actually helped in initiating some of the communications, like the Kuwaitis had reached out to us and others, but they've also been reaching out directly to Damascus. And aid has flowed in from places like Qatar. When I was just in Syria, I know there were some renovations happening in some historic religious sites by the Turks. I know the Saudis had brought in aid. So yes, some of that aid has begun. And by the way, we had something to do with that, and that was the general license. It was Ambassador Rapp and I, after going to Syria and coming back, they requested, the Assistant Secretary of State requested to meet with us. Ambassador Rapp made a very powerful case for a general license. That's why we have about 6 months of waivers that allows these countries, including Arab and Muslim countries, to pay salaries and to provide humanitarian aid, which they have. But a lot more to be done, including the general lifting of sanctions and designations, without which Syria cannot survive.
Ambassador Rapp, how keen is the new government to engage in accountability, war crimes trials, setting up a system, whatever? What is your analysis?
And they are very keen. Al-Shara, in his first speech as president, listed the transitional justice as the really #2 priority. And as they now form this national consultation, I'm sure they're going to hear it from the people. I certainly hear it from the people. I was in the courthouse in Homs last Sunday, where there were 50 people there, with criminal complaints against individuals that had harmed their families or killed their children, and wanted cases to proceed. And the government understands. I mean, we've engaged with the senior officials that this is going to take international assistance. They're very proud of the fact that they won the liberation of their country. This is their country, their system, their justice. That the system needs to be led by Syrians and be for Syrians, but they recognize that they need international assistance. And just in this last visit, the deputy minister of foreign affairs that's responsible for dealing with the documents and the mass graves, et cetera, outlined the plan that he had, indicating, of course, that it still hasn't been approved at the high level. That is yet to be done, but it seemed that the approach that we were suggesting, which is one to make a comprehensive effort to get to the documents. There are at least 20. There are, of course, documents that have been destroyed. Regime killed, destroyed some of them. Those in the Palestine Branch 235 were burned up. There's a lot of pilferage and destruction, but the examination of some of our partners indicates that there's at least 20 million pages of documents. And this regime, as we learned early on with the documents that were brought out by a group that I was involved in, the Commission for International Justice and Accountability, was document crazy. They were writing down everything. We found the warrant of Muslims arrest. We found information about the whole plan in terms of arresting 250,000 people and bringing them into custody, et cetera. We found the reports of coming up through the system about the corpses filling hospitals and the need to have mass graves to move them to. I mean, that was there already in the material that we were getting out of the north. Now we can get to the belly of the beast, and I think they recognize that working with the IIM, this international mechanism, and with the partners that it has recognized as responsible, that we can get to all of these documents, have them properly analyzed and digitized. And I think that will give us answers on probably 95% of the missing. And there indeed, if you look at the numbers of missing that have been, that involve individual requests of family members, and you look at the number of people that came out, the difference is at least 120,000 people are missing. We need to have those answers. And then there's also the question of the mass graves, and that's going to require a process like we did in Srebrenica in Bosnia, where there were 8,000 murdered men and boys in graves, and then their bodies are moved to other graves to hide the crime. It's taken many years, but through DNA matching, people providing saliva swabs, and then digging very carefully and properly and respectfully in those mass graves. We need to identify all of those remains and return them to their family members. This is key for the broader issue of justice, which is the truth, that people need to know what happened. There's the second aspect of justice, which I've always been involved in, which is the prosecution of those that bear the greatest responsibility. And they really want to do that. They're talking about 2,000 suspects, et cetera. They're going to need international assistance to chase those people up. And they're going to have to develop a process of fair trials. But it's what Syrians want. They say, we saw a regime that went after people no matter what the evidence was and hanged them or tortured them to death. We want a system based on fair trials. So I'm very, very hopeful, but you're dealing with a country where so much is destroyed. All the suburbs around Damascus are rubble, like Jobar, where the synagogue was, with 400,000 people. Ghouta and Daraya and others bombarded for years by the regime. Homs, half the city destroyed, et cetera. There's enormous amounts to do, but people know that justice is a key part of it, because that will stay the hand of vengeance, prevent people from taking out the crimes of the fathers on the sons, and it will allow this a bright future for the country. So I'm optimistic, but we have to work very hard. As Moaz mentioned, that general license, it made it clear that as of January 6th, that groups, and for the next 6 months, groups can work with the government on transitional justice, and it doesn't violate sanctions. What's needed, however, is the money to come in and reinvest in Syria and build Syria. And for that, we need a complete lifting of the sanctions that's been described.
I have a question from Veronica Zanetta. What support will you be giving to the freed prisoners, especially women and children? Psychological support.
I would just say one of the things that SETF is really good at is, like, we don't have a bunch of funding, but we have this niche of being able to bring the right people to the right place. So we have been working with universities, with mental health care experts and others to be able to do that. As a matter of fact, one of that was with Dr. Bhavna Shamalan, where she was, supporting the people in Rukban camp and helping how to deal with the trauma of what happens. So recently, Kareem from our team, who's a psychologist, alongside his dad, who's also a psychologist, went and was able to do some of that work. So SETF continues and will continue to be able to bring anyone who wants to help to Syria. That's why volunteering, joining our team is important, because you can use what you're good at to be able to help the people in Syria. And to what Ambassador Rapp was saying earlier, Damascus government is relying on our strategy on all of these things. Like when it comes to the accountability, transitional justice, how it's broken down, it is advice that they're taking seriously, because they don't see us as anything but wanting to help. And so I am very proud to say that this new government has really been kind of moving alongside us in a lot of these sensitive issues.
Dr. Bogno, can you talk more about that?
Yes, we were actually gearing to go into Rukban on the last trip, actually, right before the liberation. We didn't even know the liberation was going to happen.
Who did?
No, at that time, no. And, Moaz was making trips back and forth and had broken, the only one, like he talked about, broken the siege on Rukban, and was single-handedly bringing the residents there aid. And they had nothing, no food, no school, no infrastructure for anything. And Michelle and I from our foundation, our executive director and I were very interested in going. Moaz had snuck us into Syria at one point earlier in a visit, and we had been able to see the Wisdom House. I mean, I'm telling you, this guy is for real. He's doing all these magnificent things. Unfortunately, the U.S. government didn't give us permission to go, but I had prepared to work with the children. So we figured out a way through WhatsApp call and tried to Zoom, and there was no Wi-Fi, strong enough Wi-Fi there, but we used WhatsApp, and I worked with some of the teachers at the school that are, they're just volunteering their time trying to teach the children. about trauma and what it does to the human brain and how you can work with trauma and children to kind of calm trauma so that they can learn and, kind of like understanding the impact of all of that. So we did one session over WhatsApp. Moaz just makes it happen. And it was incredible. I was very sad not to go, but I was so happy to be able to do that. And now I'm so happy that the camp is liberated, but I do hope that they get to find their way home, the people that are still there. And I know Moaz will make that happen too.
And Moaz and I and Bhavna have been talking about the country as a whole, as a kind of a human being that, and we were discussing the idea of, that the body keeps score. And if you're not really cognizant, we will go back into the cycles again of trauma. It will happen again. So you have to be very cognizant. It can start with revenge and it can go, you could start like that. And those darker movements inside you that are in your cells. So both Bhavna's work and SETF's work with the individuals, but being cognizant, as an institution, as they're putting it together, of what the pain is, what causing what is familiar now, what has been trauma now. We don't want to codify that. And in any way, and be cognizant of trying to forgive and move on. It's so hard, but Moaz and SETF are the right ambassadors for that.
There's so many layers of impact from this 14-year, genocide, and we really need to be cognizant of that, and in rebuilding the country, be sensitive to what they've been through so that they can move forward in a way that's healing, that's truly healing. So, yeah. But thank you.
Another question. Go ahead, please.
No.
Thank you.
So we're going to go back to Ed Norton because he has good questions and he asks lots of them. And this one is, who in the United States opposes the lifting of sanctions? Does any member of the House of Representatives or any member of the Senate oppose lifting the sanctions? Are there any members of the House of Representatives or the Senate who are leading the effort to lift them?
Yeah, so we have our friends and we have our not so friends in the US government. But we're really good at leveraging our friends to do the right thing, and we're really good at exposing the hypocrisy of those that stand in the way of, helping people. Now, Syrians defeated our enemies. They defeated Russia, Iran, and Assad. I mean, the geopolitical defeat of Russia alone is unbelievable. By the way, with no aid, no, ATACMS, no, service to air, as much as and today the Syrian people are the biggest supporters of a Ukraine free of Russian invaders. But if we had gotten 0.1% of the aid that Russia got, we would have been done with this horrible guy a long time ago. But look, everything happens for a reason. We have a list of who our friends are, who our enemies are. I'll give you a couple of examples. Tulsi Gabbard, DNI, not so great, Director of National Intelligence. It was SETF, by the way, that did the biggest sort of pushback on her appointment, but, she got appointed anyway. But Joe Wilson, of the same party, in the House Foreign Affairs Committee in the US Congress, is super pro. French Hill, Brendan Boyle. By the way, there's a trend here. It's where SETF communities exist. It is the congressperson and the senators for Bhavna and Knight in Philly specifically, and overall in Pennsylvania. It is the members in Arkansas, like French Hill, who now heads the Financial Services Committee, and so on. And it's members that we've taken to Syria, those that we have reached. What we have to do is focus on, I'll give you one other example. Unfortunately, the Israelis politically here in Washington, in the United States, they say, keep the sanctions, don't lift them, etc., for whatever reasons. But morally and strategically for Israel, that's the wrong approach. But what's the powerful approach? Well, to show that these are not extremists, these are the Syrian people, is these same little kids that liberated their towns when they grew up. And the Jewish delegation going there, not for the sake of anything specific, but to go home and rebuild a 3,000-year-old culture. I mean, 3,000-year-old, it's such history. But that shows the hypocrisy of some of those that are pushing against sanctions. Same applies in different ways. So it's a much longer conversation if I were to list every member of Congress on each side of this issue, but I can tell you nobody's better at neutralizing the bad guys and like leveraging the good guys to make this happen. And we're doing it in Congress. And more importantly, we're doing it with the White House. And the Trump White House reached out to me asking for meetings, both at the White House, at the National Security Council, and State Department. That's a positive thing. And we're going to work with any administration, with any Congress, Republican or Democrat, to make sure these sanctions are lifted in months, God willing, and not in years.
So we have promised that this would conclude at 20 after the hour. We're 2 minutes over. That is my one specialty, to keep the trains running, so I have. So I want to say thank you for all of you who have joined us. Thanks to our fabulous guests. Thanks to Moaz. And thanks to the people who are working behind the scenes to make sure this all works. And please give money. And thank you for being here.
Thank you all.